Aloha mai kākou. My name is Henderson Huihui, and I am honored to join this panel of amazing and incredible people. I'm personally very excited to just hear everybody's mana'o and ike. But just a really brief introduction about myself. I'm a staff attorney at the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. My focus is on Department of Hawaiian Homeland's issues, so that ranges from lease cancellation to breaches of trust by the state. So lawsuits against the state for its administration of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. So with that out of the way, briefly, I'll just introduce our panelists. Lā Hoʻihoʻi Ea 2024 Honoree Sparky Rodrigues, most widely known for his leadership with the Mālama Mākua alongside his late wife Leandra White. Sparky was part of the kupuna line at Mauna Kea and spent 20 years as a video producer with Olelo Community Media, and he continues to be an active member of the Mālama Mākua and the which helps engagement specialist at the Honolulu Office for Earthjustice, a national nonprofit environmental law organization. She previously held leadership roles at the Sierra Club of Hawaii and KAHEA, the Hawaiian Environmental Alliance. Next, we have Dr. Keanu Sai, who had earned a PhD in political science from UH Manoa and is a lecturer of Hawaiian Studies at the Windward Community College. He is also a founding member of the Hawaiian Society of Land Politics, an organization that educates about Hawaiian sovereignty under international law and promotes curriculum development about Hawaiian statehood and international relations. This is a professor of ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, a founding member of Hawaii Peace and Justice and DMZ Hawaii, and leads historical geographical tours around Oahu for the Hawaii Detours Project. So to start this discussion, I wanted each panelist to share more about what they do to perpetuate Ea. And if you'd like to comment on the documentary, please share. So whoever would like to go first.
It was too emotional for me, being that was not a video, it was an experience. And what I'm finding over the last 20 some odd years was that we're very empathetic. So the empathy that we feel that we get from the ʻāina, it talks to us, and a lot of pain that's passed on. So was it good? Okay.
Okay. The work that I do to perpetuate Ea. So I work on environmental law, U.S. environmental law, and I have tried to pick issues to work on that have a strong intersection with the perpetuation of cultural practice for the specific purpose of returning land and power and sovereignty to Hawaiians. My family came to Hawaii with the military. My dad was stationed at Schofield with the 25th Infantry, and they divorced, and so I ended up growing up here. So I came here as a very, very small child, 6 months old, and I don't know, like Uncle Sparky said, there's just something about living here and growing up here. I feel an obligation to give back to the land that raised me. So that's why I do it.
So
I'm kind of a multifaceted person. I wear many different hats, but my primary hat that I think is really important is my work at the University of Hawaii. So teaching, sitting on doctoral committees, publishing law journal articles, peer review articles. It's an effort to correct the revisionist history. That's the key. And the history is wrong, completely wrong. So when we do bring in the issue of the Hawaiian Kingdom as a country, we're not talking about a sovereignty movement. We're talking about a country from the 19th century that still exists today. And then what is the impact of that? And through the research, how do you resolve or correct or provide some remedial prescription in fixing it and not exacerbating it, right? So my reaction to the video, oh, Sparky, you look young. You look like a spring chicken. And I knew Sparky back then, can't believe it's been that long. So under Hawaiian Kingdom law, the people were always protected. The type of economy the Hawaiian Kingdom had was a mixed economy, or called a welfare state, where they take care of the welfare of its people. So two things that resonate to me coming from that experience, right, that many have gone through, is that under Hawaiian Kingdom law, you can get up to 50 acres at $20 an acre with the inflation calculator today. That's out of the Kuleana Act, and that law existed in 1893. And then also healthcare. Healthcare was universal, so the Hawaiian Kingdom government would subsidize healthcare. So that right there, if because Hawaii is occupied, the occupier is supposed to administer the laws of the occupied state, not impose their laws that created this situation. If they administered the laws of the Hawaiian Kingdom, you wouldn't have that, right? Which is the bottom line. So again, it goes back to correcting that revisionist history so that people can see that and then go, I see some light here. But that's what we work on at the University of Hawaii. Mahalo.
Hello, my kako. I am fourth generation Japanese in Hawaii. And so I guess that's been a long process for me to try to figure out what is my kuleana here. As someone who has been nurtured by this ʻāina, but it's not Kanaka, how do I carry my kuleana in this place? And so watching this film is always moving, because I visited Makua just a little bit before, I think the evictions happened in 96. And the first time I was out there, I didn't meet Sparky then, I met John Rosa, met other folks. And then came home in 96, and I started working for the American Friends Service Committee, which later became the Hawaii Peace and Justice Group. And that's when I started working with Sparky and Fred Dodge and other folks, Leandra, out in Makua, and got involved in the Mālama Mākua movement. And I'm still on the board there. I guess in terms of like what I do to perpetuate Ea is, as someone who is not Kanaka but lives here, I try to challenge those structures of power that maintain the occupation that Dr. Sai talked about. And one of those fundamental contradictions is the U.S. military presence. It's the reason why America took Hawaii, and it's the reason why Hawaii gets used to perpetuate wars against other peoples, just like the RIMPAC exercises that are happening, where Israel and Indonesia and other genocide countries are participating, using Hawaiian lands and waters and skies to perpetuate violence and genocide against other peoples. So there's dual kuleana of addressing the violence on the land here, like we saw at Makua and Pohakuloa and Kaho'olawe, but also what are the consequences of that training, the methods of killing that are perfected here that then get used against other peoples elsewhere. So I think those dual responsibilities are things that we have to address, and that's something I try to do. Thanks. A little more info on that video. Most of the people that went there went to heal. Some of them went there to die, and they got better. And what it brought up was that Hawaiians need to find a place for peace, that we're not going to be routed by cops or forced by legislation or park is closed or no can. It's about no can rather than how can. So the suffering continues. One of the things that happened over the years that we were going through the pressure of evictions was that the governor said we had to be done and off the beach. It didn't matter where we went, but we couldn't be there. So again, the denial that culture exists and we need a place to go to heal. So my wife and I was there to heal our relationship, and it took a long time. And a part of the Makua area was Kahanahaiki, where we had a chance to deal with healing ourselves, our demons, understanding what was going on and the relationship that we had, and also with the ʻāina. The whole group that was there, we formed the Makua Council, and we went to the legislature. We talked to them about a long-term solution to homelessness. Today, the same problems exist. Same solutions are used. No improvement, same excuses. The Makua Council was self-governing. We had our own we had a peace officer that took care of any disputes, helped share, make sure that everybody was okay and safe. That was the one thing that the state didn't want us to do, become self-sufficient, independent, and make it so that we have an influence, not only in the public, but governance. We did a survey in the community, and 9 out of people at the beginning, the first one, they said, you guys are bums, get a job. A year later, after we did media, we did community events, we went to the legislature, and we did the same survey, and 9 out of the 10 people said, right on, keep doing what you're doing. So we didn't know what we were doing, other than we were just taking a step at a time. And the movement at Ea is about change. We didn't know. We had no clue. Kyle was out there helping us with doing flyers and helping us understand the media and the outreach and stuff we had to do. It took us a long time. I'm still learning. But what we have to do is be present. We need to participate. We got to have an opinion. And we cannot let other people decide for us. What is it? Can I jump in and add a little bit to that? In the film, the couple of lines that I wrote down were like, we take care of each other. It's a healing place and practicing sovereignty. And I think that that's the thing that terrified the state, is that the community getting together was more effective at taking care of each other than the state could be, right? And we see this over and over again in Lahaina. In the aftermath of the fire, people organize themselves to get aid to people. Up at the Mauna in 2019, that was a city that was providing food, education, healthcare, other kinds of material needs for people, right? And it just shows that, the state was not able to take care of those things. So that's the practice of Ea, and that's also, these kipuka aloha ʻāina will spread the idea that it's possible to have a different kind of world. Yeah.
Mahalo. So this question is for Sparky and Marty. Now, Earthjustice has taken the Army to court several times since 1998. In partnership with community advocates like Sparky and members of the Mālama Mākua, last December, Earthjustice announced the U.S. Army will formally end live fire training in Makua Valley forever. So, and what it took to achieve this, and what the next steps are.
And let me start that long story short. When Leandro and I first went, we went to Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund and asked for help to see if they could help us legally to protect all the homeless, the houseless Hawaiians around the beach. And they said, no can if it's people, but we can if it's endangered species. So we turned our attention to the Hawaiians that don't have a voice. And that is where we started making inroads and understanding that the legal part was able to defend the ʻāina through endangered species. Took a long time for us to understand, but go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I mean, Earthjustice, yeah, I wasn't there. It wasn't my fault. Earthjustice has learned a lot in the interim. So, hats off to David Beacon, who was the attorney. He did a fantastic job, and I think the lesson learned is that it takes tenacity and patience to take on the empire. I mean, I think it's important to have realistic expectations. So it's not like suing the army over, is going to get the U.S. to leave and return sovereignty to Hawaiians, right? So being realistic, but we can like pin them down, and we can help people to see things in a different perspective, right? So the course of this litigation helped to change the narrative of the military's presence, at least in Makua, right? This idea that they have to train our boys, need to, be able to kill well. And the more the Makuans get education, it doesn't sound like that's the right use of this land. And it's, I don't know, for me looking back, I think it was, and it's important to allow space for people to grow because, in 1996, 97, 98, that time frame, I was watching the news and people getting evicted, and, I'm going to be on the side of the, right side of history. And I was totally like, well, we have to take care of the species and the critters, right? And it was like a huge blind spot to like, what about the human beings? So, we've definitely come to, to this higher enlightenment to where now, when we are doing litigation, this like public interest, high impact litigation, whether it be over streams or, Red Hill, whatever, right? We center the humans, right? We center the natural resources and the human beings who are vulnerable, the ones who rely on those natural resources. And when you put that in the center and you make your decisions from that radiating out, you tend to make better decisions for the people in the land. So I think it's right. So you go in with realistic expectations. You pace yourself because it's going to take 20, 30 years. We little bitty guy, right? Huge empire, right? Basically like kicking dirt on their shoes, right? But at some point, you're able to kick so much dust up that they are like frustrated and like, fine, let it go, right? So that it's one tactic. It's not like the thing that's going to set us free, right? But it is definitely going to be the thing that pushes back on that empire, right? And I don't know, if you find joy in pushing back on the empire, you can like get involved in this kind of litigation. It's important to find joy in your work. So, yeah.
And there were a few other things that happened during that time. The layering of the military, they use the word kapu, which is sacred. So if you look at the fencing, unexploded ordnance, this is sacred, so we stay out. Not because it's unsafe, but because the impression was that it's a sacred place. And as we started understanding the level of sacredness, why are we allowing them to blow the place up and making it so that it's so contaminated that it's going to take a long time? And we started out with the military doing an EA, and their result was no significant impact. Then we got them to do yeah, of course, for them. And the thing is, they always use the idea of a routine training exercise, and there is no such thing as routine. Every exercise is different. So that was one of the things we were able to kind of get in the door and continue the dialogue.
Another thing I'll add is one thing I noticed is just like a baby lawyer watching a lot of this stuff go down was that the amount of minds that were changed on the other side in the course of 20 years of litigation. Like that was quite impressive. Mālama Mākua can count that up. Yeah. And you infected them, right? Exactly. Infecting people with a law. Yeah. So I like one thing that I think we have learned well over the course of generations of protests against fire is that it's not necessarily about like an individual soldier, right? Like it's not hating on that particular one guy, right? This is about institution, and it's true the institution is made up of people, and you can connect with those people, and when you connect with them, you can maybe flip them, and then they are inside of this huge institution, and hopefully, embracing their own sovereignty and making decisions and choices that are for the better, which we saw in small ways amongst some of the soldiers on the other side of this issue over the course of 20 years. And so I think that's, when we're out in the world and we're interacting with, people who are here because of the military, I think it's important to approach them with love and aloha, right? And but then also to challenge them to try to, to flip them, how is it that you can be the good guy and you are doing this to us, right? Like that kind of cognizance, it helps them to see the world more fully and more correctly, right? To correct the history, the narrative that they are told, right? That's something to keep in mind, right? They are told a story that helps them to justify to themselves what they are doing. And part of our job, I think, when we interact with these people is to help them to understand a more full and more true story that helps them also to recognize their role in ensuring justice for the future.
Now, turning to something that was mentioned by Kyle, and when we look out in the horizon in these past few weeks, we see the military and the warships out there. So since late June, military forces from 30 nations have gathered in and around our islands for the biennial Rim of the Pacific, also known as RIMPAC. According to the military, the theme of RIMPAC 2024 aims to foster cooperative relationships and promote a free and open Indo-Pacific through training exercises like amphibious landings, anti-submarine drills, and SINKEX, where a decommissioned naval vessel is bombarded in the open sea until it sinks. This year, RIMPAC also features its largest ever disaster relief drills, reflecting on the rise in global climate-related disasters. So this question goes to all of us. How do you perceive the impacts of militarization and international military campaigns like RIMPAC on our local community and on the environment?
Hey.
Respect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So many impacts. The U.S. military is one of the largest polluters in the world. Certainly one of the largest consumers of fossil fuels, and we're only now beginning to understand the full extent of their impact on the climate, because militaries are exempt from reporting their carbon emissions to the international bodies. And we should be having a report coming out about the impacts soon. But so there's environmental impacts, unexploded ordnance, fires, destruction of habitat, destruction of cultural resources, cultural sites. There's the impacts on our waters, such as Red Hill. And this was one that was an avoidable disaster, that if they had listened to the voices of activists like Marty, who was leading the charge for Sierra Club for so long, and many others, Board of Water Supply, we could have stopped this disaster from happening in 2021. But instead, thousands of people were poisoned. But in some ways, it opened people's eyes to the threat that we're under due to militarization. And so now that window has been opened, now that we have the ability to see what the stakes are, we have responsibilities to address this problem on a larger scale, which includes addressing the military leases that expire in 2029. 40,000 acres of land are at stake here. These are stolen lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom. They're Crown and government lands that have been leased for $1 for 65 years. So it's time for our land back, and it's time to imagine and create different kind of futures, I think. Part of the problem is that the economics of the military in Hawaii keep a kind of a stranglehold, keep us dependent. It's kind of like tourism and the military are these two sources that maintain control. And so how do we develop capacities to wean ourselves from this? It's almost like an addiction economy where you just have to get that next fix. and it leads to a deterioration of the body in the long term. And so I think that that's part of what responsible leadership needs to be moving us towards, that a different kind of future. Of course, things like environmental restoration, like the conservation programs that they have at Makua and other places are really great. That should be funded as conservation programs and not to enable more military destruction of other lands, right? And then with regard to impact, one of the things that we are just beginning to get a better handle on its impact socially are the impacts on women and girls. There's a problem of military personnel and sex industry, sex trafficking, abuse of women that happens in bases all around the world. And so when RIMPAC comes to town, it brings that problem here. And so we don't quite have all the statistics, but we're starting to get a picture of it. And that's something that we have to address, and no one is really taking that on except for some groups in the community and the Women's Commission. I'll stop there.
I think part of the harm that RIMPAC does is it normalizes this kind of violence, right? It normalizes this idea, of course, we're supposed to, be ready to storm a city or a village, right? Like they have these mock towns that they've built, right? And they practice going in and killing everybody, and having the U.S. host a bunch of other militaries here helps to because people have, like I said, that cognitive dissonance, right? And they're kind of like, this doesn't feel right. But when you get all together in a big group, right, and be like, no, this is normal, this is good, right? And what that is probably the biggest, like, silent behind the, in the background harm. And it goes to all of the other problems. The human trafficking issue cannot be understated. Domestic violence in military households is very high. There are a whole host of social ills that come with hosting people outside. They are these families, these dependent families that get shipped here, right? They have no support network, and they are put in very stressful situations. Things get weird when you do that. Take people out of their element, and the environmental impacts cannot be overstated at all. I mean, our water is polluted, poisoned for the foreseeable future. Like, it has not dawned on at least our lawmakers the full extent of the harm that we are suffering through right now. We are in the early days of the water crisis. It is going to get much, much worse before it gets better. And we need to start getting really real with ourselves about how we are going to manage without our primary aquifer to provide fresh water for us. Like, the days of abundant drinking water on Oahu are over. And we're still kind of like, a little bit, because we're in denial about it. And the fact that there are people that are willing to make the case that the military provides, there's, technology that the military provides that makes it worth it for us to host them, right? All the harms that they've caused, it's worth it because of the money that we get, right? The convenience that we get. And then, seriously, try to operate without water. What kind of economy do you have, right? So it's like the harm is like so severe. It's across the board and all the way deep. It's because it's fundamentally not the key, right? Like, that is the thing, right? They are a culture of death and destruction. The U.S. generally, and the U.S. military in particular. And part of, I think, our job as Lā Hoʻihoʻi is to be the counter to that, the culture of care. Yeah.
Mālama Mākua changed our mission statement to Makua being the Piko of peace. And with that, I had to take a look at how am I behaving, because it's one of the things my wife Andrew would always say, I needed to be civil, because I would tend to be more sarcastic with a lot of these guys. And how do I end up understanding what is my role in all of this? Right? And it got to the point where I'm able to talk to these generals or admirals or whoever they are and not feel inferior, and in fact feeling in a position of power because I'm standing on the ʻāina, the kupuna behind me. So the Piko of Peace is one of the things. We're dealing with the EIS now. This is the version of hide the, I don't know, whatever it is. I've been raised as an American. So overcoming that stuff and saying, I'm not American, very difficult to initially do. Dealing with these guys who are very American and dealing with the fabric that we have helped support, we defend because we're so addicted to the money and the comfort of being an American society. If we were to retain and become a Hawaiian society, we're going to have to go through chaos and some pain. Aipohako is not the favorite thing for us, but it might be something we'll have to deal with, and we're not prepared as a community, as family, as individuals. World War II, during martial law, the Army already had a plan in place, what they called scorched earth. Kahana Valley was another place. And what they were going to do was blow up sections of the road so you couldn't get through. Downtown, they were going to blow up the top businesses so the invading military or whoever was not going to be able to use that as a resource. And in Alpha, they're going to return some of the lands to Hawaiians. The utmost basement was radioactive. And one of the things that happens within the military is that if you're being overrun, you can destroy all of your resources, blow everything up. I bet right now in Pearl Harbor, they have a way of destroying all of their assets. And we're not even in the plan, other than we become collateral damage. And at that point, how do we heal from peace with all of the potential threats? And maybe Keanu can talk more about stuff like that. I would like to be able to give them an eviction notice and tell them you got to be out 30 days, otherwise our sheriff's going to come. But we don't have that teeth yet. But what I learned from my kids and grandkids, no is not an option. They're going to keep asking until you give up. So how do we keep asking? What words do we use? What do we keep? We need to educate them. So on the command dollars we talk to, we talk about the elephant in the room. Illegal, overthrow, military occupation. When are you going to pack up and leave? How about cleaning up your mess first? But we need to do that. We need to have we need to be fearless and not only educating our friends and family, because they're going to resist. They want comfort. They don't want to change. They don't want to aipohako. No.
So the impact of the U.S. military in Hawaii. I want to point out in 1990, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, also called FEMA, put out a brochure called Risks and Hazards State by State. And that identified on what fighting targets for the past night. That was 1990. That was annihilation. So basically, U.S. military presence, the impact that it has on everybody, it's an existential threat, bottom line. The question is, how do you deal with that? And how do you approach it? For myself, I'm former military. So I was a field artillery officer in the Army, both active and reserve. I was in for 10 years. I know the lingo. And in Army regulations, it's clear, it's all there. It says exactly what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. One of the points that is very explicit, and it's in U.S. Army Field Manual 27-10. When a country is invaded and its government is overthrown, sovereignty is not affected. It's still in the country called an occupied state. But the occupier has that duty to temporarily serve in place of that government that it overthrew, to continue to administer the laws of the occupied state until you get a treaty of peace. That's how it's supposed to be. And every military officer knows that. FM 27-5 explains exactly how a military government is created. So this is nothing new. But what the U.S. military does is it takes advantage of people who don't know that language, so they don't know how to ask the questions. You ask the wrong questions, they don't have to answer. So going back to education, and what we do at the university is to ensure that we understand the language in order to speak the language and have a conversation which leads to accountability. That's how it's supposed to work. But we're still talking about sovereignty as if we're trying to get it. According to the U.S. Army Field Manual, sovereignty never left the country. It's still in the Hawaiian Kingdom. That's how we were able to access the Permanent Court of Arbitration back in 1999. We didn't need people to approve. We just operate on what is. So it's a very different language, right? So a lot of everything that is happening in Hawaii since 1893 is all invalid. It's completely invalid because when you look at the apex of the situation, who has title to Hawaii? Is it the Hawaiian Kingdom or is it the United States? Evidence shows it's not the United States, it's the Hawaiian Kingdom. So as a consequence, everything that the United States was operating within the Hawaiian Kingdom, imposing its laws, it's all invalid. Yeah, it's invalid. The question is, how do you address that without throwing this place into economic chaos? Because it's being compounded right now. One of every couple of years. But should not get people to say, break up. To me, it's a military approach. Very tough. So God, I trained as a military officer. My political science background only sharpened my skills, but I'm still a red leg. I'm a field artillery guy, king of battle. But I'm fighting for my country, the Hawaiian Kingdom. And what I employ is not warfare, lawfare. Oh, yeah. And I saw the impact and what can come out of it. So a lot of what we're seeing throughout the islands, a lot of our people don't have answers. They don't, because we're not speaking that language. But I know exactly how to hold accountable the Indo-Pacific commander when I talk Army regs and Department of Defense directives. That's when you hold them to task and call on it. So that's what I do. So that's my other hat that I have on. What's that? Collegiate hat. Yeah. So, yeah, I want to make sure that the U.S. military here will need to leave, not because I choose, but because that's according to Army regs. There's no title here for the U.S. military to be here other than executive orders by the president and leases by the state of Hawaii, which was created by the American law and Congress called the Statehood Act, which is supposed to be limited to U.S. territory. You see how complicated this thing can be? We got to speak that language in order to move toward how do we address this problem without blowing this place up any more than it's blown up already. And that's the work that I do outside. Yeah, mahalo.
Just to pick up a little bit on that. Sorry, he does deserve that applause. When we talk to the command guys, we want the Makua return. And you say, well, there's no mechanism to return land to the people. But there is a mechanism for them to take the land. And within the EIS, there's a section that they want a retention. And there's a section, even with Makua, the very last option is where they get a little bit, but enough for them to get access to the amount that they stole. The other part is that when we talk to them about the overthrow and them having to enforce kingdom law, they say, what is the subject for your discussion to Department of State? But all the stuff that the interactions we've ever had has always been Department of Interior. And I keep scratching my head. So right now, all the Kuleana land in Makua, the Army claims is fee. How did they get it? Gunpoint, bulldozer, martial law. And what they tell me now is that they bought all of the Kuleana lands from McCandless, who bought all the Kuleana lands from the Kuleana owners. And there's several kupuna that says they were waiting 6 months after the war to get their land back. And the only way they got land was being buried in Makua. So the lie continues, the distraction continues. And this is part of the convenient denial of everybody, not only military, but the state, the county. And what's really insidious is us. because we allow all this shit to happen and continue to happen without questioning our legislators, our pro-military, pro-American sentiment. And how do we change that? It starts with, here, I gotta. So it's Makusa Pico piece, I gotta change. I gotta work on my puli'o'o to see how do I end up changing from repelling the enemy to getting them to return to more of a peaceful environment.
I really think that we are at a pivot point right now. Like, with the crisis, the water crisis brought on by the Red Hill disaster, I think a lot of people, it's people who I would normally assume are just pro-military. Fucking with the water gives people a second, right? Like, holy moly, this is much more severe than I ever really thought about, right? Like, I grew up here. I did not think about the military at all. Like, it was just normal. It was like a thing, like, I went to the public school with the bugle that went off in the morning. Like, and it was just completely normal, right? And it's that since, being in law school, being exposed to people like Sparky, Kyle, and Keanu, that I, started to see things differently. And I think that we are at a pivot point now. We have this lease that's coming up, several thousand acres. It's not all the land the military has here, right? It's like little pockets and pieces here and there, right? But it begs the question, why should the state be helping the U.S. military wreak havoc on other countries and other places? Why? We shouldn't be helping them do that, right? How is that fulfilling the public trust, which is the obligation the state has taken on, right? And the so-called fake state that they've established of, like, don't worry, we'll take care of Hawaiians. We have this public trust doctrine. If they give us all that doctrine, follow that law, follow their own laws, and also fulfill their mission to be a plague on the planet, basically. Anyway, so I feel like there are people who are starting to have these aha moments, and part of it, I think, is for those who already had their aha moment. Good. The big conference, right? Based on Mark's walk. Righteousness that we are in. There's a lot of opportunity that can come out of us shifting our mindset and no longer being accepting and embracing of the U.S. military's presence. We've learned that the more consistently we can make them itchy, the more likely they're to go home, right? And actually, even like that's like we should really think about it. Like, well, I don't know what it takes to get land back. What Hawaiians have done it, right? Kaho'olabi is amazing. That is amazing. I don't know of other stories where people were able to just put their bodies in the right place at the right time and they got land back. Like, that's amazing. And we have to do that again, all over the place, right? Not just for the military, but for, all these horrible multinational corporations who are using our lands for heavens knows what, right? Like, we need to do what they want to do. We need to be able to assert a land back. And I don't know, it gives me comfort to know that we've done it before and we can do it again.
Well, I think we have time really quickly for one last question before we open it up for to the audience for questions. And this goes out to all the panelists. What can the general public do to hold the military accountable? Get in their face, do testimony for the areas.
My testimony with no land retention, enforce kingdom law, pack up. Before you pack up, clean up, and pack up and go. Live in peace.
There are a lot of tools for holding the military accountable. There are tools within the U.S. legal system, and I find a lot of poetry in holding the U.S. military accountable to their own U.S. laws. Like, that's particularly sweet when you can really get them, right? But then there's also international law, which I am not a practitioner of, but I know that there are a lot of people who are working on that front of it. And I think that is that's a fruitful way to go as well. And then there's also that like interpersonal like engagement that we do, right? Your neighbors, right? Like you, people who are, you know, just moved in here, they're part of the military system, whether they're a contractor or they're just, you know, a military family living off base, like engage with them, make friends, right? See the divinity in them and love them and to try to convert them as best you can, right? And we have seen it happen, and it's because of military folks who, you know, flip on the inside that we are able to get them to make certain kinds of decisions that end up to being, you know, in our favor. But yeah, and I there's, you know, I think Imai said it earlier. It's about our own minds, right? Like as soon as we stop thinking that it's normal to be occupied by the U.S. military, the sooner you realize that the opportunities you have to try to like just challenge every opportunity shows up. Like when I go to a business and they have military discount, I say, why? Why do you have a military discount? Did you know that they get $3,000 extra every month for housing? How come they get a discount? I want their discount. You know, come on. So like, and you don't have to be concerned about it, but you can be like, why? Like let read, right? Whenever I see military convoy on public roads, I drive slow right in front of them just to be annoying, right? Part of it is my own like joy, right? Finding joy in your work is important. But also I think it's important for them to get this ignored. You know, this is not okay. We are no longer falling for it. I think that goes a long way.
So I don't advocate anybody to engage with the military if they don't know what they're doing.
It's like, I like to be personal.
Mike Tyson, just go. That's irresponsible. Very irresponsible. Now, maybe that person may want to engage Mike Tyson, but logic dictates you better get prepared. You better understand how the system works. You got to know the language so you can engage that particular entity. Speak their language, not that it's separate, but it's the language of the military, period. That's what it is. It's called or the law of armed conflict. So what I take for granted is my training already as an officer, so I already know that language, right? But I do know that our people don't know that language. So what I've seen, because of the false narrative or the revisionist history, let me use this analogy. It's like we are trying to explain a football game using baseball rules. Yeah. And I hear baseball all the time, but yet the person throws in football. Then he throws in pitcher, catcher, shortstop. It's confusion. So we have to know what are football rules that apply to a football game, and then you have a play. Until that point, mass confusion, and people can get hurt. So the stakes are high in this. So I constantly encourage people to get educated first. And when I see people, just the way I do things, I see people in two ways, especially during our situation of a prolonged occupation. You are a maker, but you're affected by decisions made. It's called a pecking order, right? So I want to get to that apex where that decision will be made. Boom, it comes down. That's Army rates. That's how it works. Command decisions. So I encourage our people to restore their national consciousness by understanding our history and trying to answer those questions that you have. Because if you already know that you're thinking baseball when it's football, take the time to understand what are football rules first. And that's what we teach at the university. I just got an article that was published this past June out of the International Review of Contemporary Law. And in there, the title of my law article is Investigating War Crimes Being Committed in Hawaii. Now, if that is a frivolous statement, that would never have been published by this law journal. No, it's real. Now, that's an indicator. That's football rules. But once you mention war crimes, ooh, no, there's specific war crimes. and army knows that. Very specific. Very. It's not just generalized. So there are things that are happening right now where decision makers are being held accountable. And July 31st is coming up. It's going to start a chain of events down the chain of command because I'm talking their language, right? But it's not like everybody gets involved. Well, it's just the amazing thing here is just saying, perform your duty. Dereliction of duty, war crime by omission. Next, bang, bang, bang. Who is duty bound to do what they're supposed to do, and how you get out of not performing your duty? Show me the kingdom doesn't exist. Don't see the elephant in the room. Let's not talk about it. Because if you can show the kingdom doesn't exist, no war crimes. You don't, you in trouble because there's no statute of limitations. In fact, Germany in 2022 convicted a Nazi war criminal, a 97-year-old woman, for Nazi war crimes. You don't want war crimes on your back because you're in the club. That's what the Germans probably said in 1941 in France when somebody went up to, you're committing a war crime. Ha, ha, ha. 1945, Nuremberg. So we have to be careful. There are profound ramifications. So just to kind of tie it up, I encourage our people, all people across the world and our own people here, we got to educate ourselves and not try to find things that confirm our own bias, right? And that's what's important because the stakes are very, very high. So when we're looking at FEMA identifying 5 targets for nuclear strike, that is not a joke. That's an existential threat. Look what happened with North Korea and the false alarm. Everybody panicked. In fact, I was teaching a class at Windward Community College. I was like, where are we going? There's no basement. Oh, Palanakila, it's a concrete building. I know how nuclear weapons work. You're gone. That should have been a wake-up call. But, now we have the water crisis. Now everything keeps piling up because of U.S. military presence and the imposition of American laws. It has to be addressed in a way that there's an issue of withdrawal, but also filling the gap where there's no chaos, or at least not total chaos. All right. So that would be my recommendation for everyone. Yeah, for sure. Mahalo.
Start.
Yeah, mahalo, Keanu, for all that work you folks are doing to bring that awareness and to take it up with these international bodies, right? I think it is a very special niche to address these problems. I think the other thing that's happening too is that the U.S. acts like an empire, which means that it doesn't follow its own laws or the laws that they're supposed to follow, right? So they can create exceptions to the rule. And this is what happens when you have things are happening at these different registers. And so I think we have to be able to fight in different arenas and in different ways because they're also first jumping between these different universes. And so one of the things that I think we see is how there's that leaked report that came out where the Navy, their public relations report, where they said they're really concerned about how many negative stories are in the media. They are susceptible to public opinion to some extent, right? Because it affects what politicians think, it affects funding. So there are ways that they are also vulnerable to certain kinds of other influence that we have access to. And so shaping public opinion is very important. Red Hill, how did we get the Secretary of Defense to shut down Red Hill in March 2022? Right? After years of them saying it's absolutely essential for national security, we will never shut it down. We shifted that. And that was because of people power and because we shifted that narrative significantly. So that's one thing that we do have some power and influence in. There's Andre Perez has been recording video and audio recordings of all the flights and the noise that's happening around where he lives. And we've been talking about, hey, we should start documenting this because I'm sure all of you have seen the helicopters and everything flying over. So, these are all evidence of the illegal occupation, evidence of violence, the mundane kinds of violence that intrude in our lives, that we need to document and begin to create an archive that becomes part of the evidence of these war crimes that need to be taken up. And, writing letters to the editor, writing op-eds, these may seem kind of like small things, but that's something that political officials, politicians read, right? They pay attention to what's being said about them. So again, back to this leaked report about how many negative stories they're getting, that's important. And I think we also have to be prepared for nonviolent direct action. I mean, that's something that it's, it may be outside of the scope of international law, of occupation. It might be outside the scope of what's considered legal under the state of Hawaii, but it also disrupts the violence the actual violence is happening to the land or to people or what have you. And so, when it's done strategically, tactically, well-planned, skillfully, it can have profound effects. And this is what Kaolave revealed, this is what Monkale revealed, is that by having these points of intervention at the point of destruction, at the point of decision, at the point of production, these are all places where you can disrupt the normal flow of events. And it creates, if anything, it gives us more time, but in many cases, it actually jams the gears of destruction, right? And so I think we need to be gearing up for that possibility of needing to stop some convoys or whatever. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I think that those are some of the things that have always been successful for the Hawaiian movement. It was successful in Vieques, Puerto Rico, when they shut down the bombing range on that island and got the Navy out. So yeah, just something that we need to be preparing ourselves spiritually for, and then psychologically and physically. Thanks.
If I can just add one more part, one more thing. So when we speak about Red Hill and the crisis, from an international law standpoint and the law of armed conflict, that is destruction of property. Destruction. That's a war crime. Okay. When you have munitions being blown at Puhakuloa, where the 155 howitzers, 500-pound bombs, JDAMs, whatever it may be, that is destruction of property. That's a war crime. When you have a trial going on in the state of Hawaii without any authority, that is a war crime. So we have to start to put the war crimes on what is a war crime and make it part of the conversation. So I'd recommend, if you go to hawaiiankingdom.org, hawaiiankingdom.org, go to Google Dr. Keanu Sai, go to my UH website, and you can download my latest article on war crimes being committed in Hawaii and use it as talking points, because not everything is a war crime. It's very specific. You got grave breaches, you got customary international law that identifies war crimes, but we need to be mindful of that. So that's part of changing that conversation, where you don't have to engage the military. You can say, isn't that a war crime? And then cite my article. Tell your Jen, go read the article, right? So it's really engaging in a way that is constructive, but also responsible, which is important. Yeah. So when people tell me about, Red Hill, war crime. Really? Yeah, war crime. Oh, what about Apocalypse? War crime. We got all kind of war crimes. See, you can commit war crimes, but that doesn't mean you can be prosecuted for war crimes. Mm. See, there's a thing called the actus reus. It's called the act or the criminal act. So the criminal act is the destruction, right? So the Red Hill, destruction, clearly. But you also have to have another element. It's called mens rea, or the state of mind, that they knew that it was unlawful and they still destroyed it. That's very difficult to find, because the people today don't know anything. So they can claim, I don't know, that's a valid excuse. They committed a war crime, but you can't be held criminally liable. Now, that exposure that I was talking about in educating and adjusting the people's history. The text on you took class. Now you know. Where you work? Oh, you GS12. No problem. Now you cannot say you don't know. See, and that's a way to get accountability, by getting people to think, whoa, what am I doing? Because war crimes are committed by people, not countries. You can't put a country in prison. right? But you can put an individual in prison for committing a particular war crime, and you have certain elements that have to be met. In fact, Professor William Shavis, the renowned expert on war crimes in the world from Middlesex University, London, he drafted a legal opinion, 2020, on war crimes being committed in Hawaii and what are those elements that have to be met for criminal culpability. Imagine me showing that to somebody. Check this out. Go show you Jag. Tell him refute this. I got your attention. I'm just trying to get you to follow the rules. So lawfare is very powerful and how you wield it, right? I'm not into warfare because that's not what we're doing. We're dealing with a cerebral revolution. It's all in our head. But we got to speak the language to have consequences. My job is to bring compliance because I'm not going to have my country or our country being compromised any more than it has been for 131 years. Lava. So yeah, let's start using the language as part of learning about football rules. Malo.
All right, we have time for one question, maybe two from the audience. So I saw this gentleman's hand in the back.
Hey, aloha nui loa kako, pardon me. Hey, aloha, you guys. My question was in terms of international law. I'm trying to gain a better understanding on protected person status regarding Hawaiian nationals and the war crimes being committed. I was wondering if Dr. Keanu Sai could elaborate a little bit more on protected person status. I did see it in the textbook investigating war crimes being committed in the Hawaiian Kingdom, so I would really appreciate some elaboration there. I saw it was go under international law to fight.
Wow. That's that mass reason for a combatant to fight a combatant, especially when you have the U.S. military are comprised of our own people who didn't even know that Hawaii is occupied. Because I was in the Army. You're going to tell me I was committing war crimes? Guess what? I didn't have mens rea, but now I do. Okay, I have to get out of the Army, right? But it's not an issue of engagement, physical engagement. No, we're occupied. And one particular rule of occupation is called temporary obedience, not allegiance. So as long as the occupier is administering the laws of the occupied state, you have to be obedient under the laws of the Hawaiian Kingdom, being the occupied state. But you can't be obedient if you don't know what those laws are that should be administered, right? Because we're still going back to we don't know. We've been brainwashed into believing something that's not true, that this is America and that we're American. No, that's false, completely false. Now, going to your question on protected persons. So protected persons comes out of the Geneva Convention, which means that protected persons have rights and they cannot be a national of the occupier. So American citizens would not be considered protected persons. Protected persons will be the nationals or citizenry of the occupied state, and they have certain rights, and that's in the Geneva Convention. So if a war crime is committed against a protected person, a grave breach of the Geneva Convention, Fourth Geneva Convention, that's a war crime. But if the person was not a protected person and a grave breach was committed, that's not a war crime. Now that idea of protected person was expanded in what is called international criminal law. So the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, right, where they're prosecuting, in this case, this guy named Tadic, they identified that a Bosnian, because Yugoslavia was really just one country, it wasn't an engagement of two states or two or more states. It was a dismembering of a state, the former Yugoslavia. They came out with the fact that certain persons who hold allegiance to a particular group that was fighting can be considered as a protected person and thus a war crime being committed. So in that sense, American citizens could be considered under international criminal law a protected person if they hold their allegiance to the occupied state and not their allegiance to the United States or its military, right? So that's that. Now, number one, there is no way that we could use international law without Hawaii still being a country as an independent state, because international law only applies to independent states, period. That's what it is. It's a law between states. So the fact that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, and it was already verified, that status, by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 1999, that's what allows us to speak to the issues of international law, speaks to the issue of war crimes, violation of the law of armed conflict. Without that, we can't make these arguments, okay? So it's important to know that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, not because I believe it, because it's a matter of law, and it's already been verified, which is out of our hands. So now what are the consequences to that? And the question that you brought up about protected person is a question stemming from that status, not stemming from we want to become an independent state, or like Palestine is still trying to be universally recognized, but it doesn't have that, whereas the Hawaiian Kingdom is fully recognized since the 19th century. And also Hawaii, by treaty, 4 treaties, it's a neutral state. So back in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom was a neutral state by treaty, along with Belgium, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. So there are 4 neutral states that would apply during wartime. The fact that the United States military is here is also a direct violation of Hawaiian neutrality. And FEMA, that brochure, is the evidence of the existential threat. But for the military presence, we wouldn't be threatened. We would be neutral. So again, we need to understand how neutrality works, especially during warfare, right? So there's so much there, but I just want to make the point. I could not speak to the issue of international law in the Hawaiian Kingdom in law journal articles if the Hawaiian Kingdom didn't exist. So why is everybody outside knowing the kingdom exists, but we're still trying to figure out who has sovereignty? It's a reflection of we need to get better educated. Yeah.
Aloha. Thank you so much for providing this talk this evening. But my question is about education and specifically law. So as we prepare to have a Hawaiian Kingdom court that can administer Hawaiian Kingdom law, how are we going to get certified lawyers or lawyers that are able to practice Hawaiian Kingdom law if it's not even being taught? That's one question. We've got this beautiful room we're sitting in right now. When can we start having Hawaiian Kingdom court laws where we can have justice served? Because the court system here is not serving the people at all. It's harming us.
Okay, so under the law of occupation, Army Field Manual 27-10 and 27-5, when a government is overthrown through military force, and the President Cleveland admitted that it was by an act of war, right? The military, back in 1893, was supposed to have taken control of the civilian government of the Hawaiian Kingdom, put a military governor at its head to replace the Queen, and continue to administer the laws of the occupied state so you don't throw this place into economic chaos. That's precisely what the United States did in Iraq by creating the Coalition Provisional Authority. They were administering Iraqi law. They were not bringing in American law. General MacArthur did the same thing after the Treaty of Surrender in September of 1945. General MacArthur then took over the Japanese government as the military government and continued to administer Japanese law until the Treaty of Peace took effect in 1952. Then the occupation came to an end. So here we are, where the military government has not been established, an American military government, but taking over the civilian apparatus of the occupied state, which is the state of Hawaii. So that part needs to take place where the state of Hawaii will need to be transformed into a military government according to Army regulations, begin to administer the laws of the occupied state, and begin to address all the issues of Red Hill, everything else, and bring it to solution, and then also deal with reparations, deal with the fact that there's denationalization that had occurred. But you have to look at precedents that apply, not we operate in a vacuum and let me think what should happen. No, we go back to what was and how we move from there. And in the Army, there's regs for everything. Everything. You sneeze, there's a reg, right? It's just what regulations are you supposed to use? And given the circumstances, you get directed to the right regulations. So I've been in communication with Major General Hara and his JAG, right? Lieutenant Colonel Phelps. They can't deny it. All they're saying is, but how do we get past the civilians that are creating the problem in a state of Hawaii who know nothing about the law of occupation and military duties? But by getting involved with awareness, that could be a war crime as an accessory or as an accomplice. See, that also applies. So those are the kind of things that we talk about, because we need to bring jurisdiction back. We need to bring the laws back, but we also have to bring the laws from 1893 up to date to administer, right? You don't operate from laws of 1893, but there is a way, and it has been done to bring it up to date, called provisional laws. So all these things are all in play. It's not something we got to figure out. So things are going to start happening outside, but it behooves all of us to continue to get educated, to look into issues, to read things. That is important. But things have already been triggered, and for the betterment. But there's going to be some fallen trees if they get arrogant. And all I'm telling them is stand down. Be sure you know what you're doing. And that's where we're at right now. So, yeah, it's not going to be a class. But by the way, I do teach it. So in fact, I had this one Chief Master Sergeant who was in charge of the Air National Guard, took my class, and I got tagged him. And at the end of my class, the semester, he went, oh my God, I saw. And it was so simple. Because he understands the regulations. It wasn't difficult. But for a civilian to get it, OMG, WTF. To an Army guy, military guy, got it. Move on. No task is too daunting. So it's the approach. So I like to say military approach to the military problem. And I'm Hawaiian. Because I'm part of the Hawaiian Army, because the Hawaii Army National Guard used to be called the King's Guard. And it was the name change in 1893 to the National Guard. No, it's still the King's Guard. So when you have that in mind, it kind of brings settlement, a sense of ease in your mind, going, okay, I can still be a soldier. But the right soldier and the right army is the key. But responsibility. Mahalo.
All right, thank you so much. If we could, unfortunately, we are out of time. We do have a hard stop that we need to honor. But if we could just thank our panelists for their sharing their time and their thought.